Hello, so this is gonna kind of be like a rant video. So straight off, I'm just gonna say, like, if you don't want to hear about like the bad things about being trans, like transphobia and like trans medicalism and stuff, if you just don't want to hear about that right now, because it can be kind of depressing because there's so much talk about it, you probably don't want to watch this video, because I'm gonna go off, I'm gonna get mad, and I'm gonna say some stuff about that. So yeah, if you don't want to see that, that's fine. This is just something that pisses me off and exhausts me, because it happens even in like spaces with like trans allies. They still do this kind of thing, and they don't understand how like hard it is for like us to hear about this stuff, and like to just like constantly have to know everything about ourselves. So basically what I'm trying to say is trans people do not need to explain things to you all the time. Like, there's so much to being trans. We don't need to be like psychologists, neurologists, endocrinologists, surgeons, psychologists, like gynecologists, obstetricians, dietitians, sexologists. We don't need to be all these things, but all of these things go into being trans, and we're kind of expected to be able to just like list off these random facts and like tell you about these things just because you want to know about it, because it's not really something that's ever concerned you, because you haven't ever had to worry about it. Like, good for you, I guess. And we don't need to like have to cite medical studies when we're like just like saying things about ourselves. Like, we don't need to have like a medical study proving that trans people exist to be able to come out. Like, some people have to do that. Like, some people, when they come out, they have to like get like medical documents and show them, like, and medical studies, and show them to the people they're coming out to, just so those people will take them even a tiny bit seriously. And even then, they don't even take them seriously half the time. We don't need to like know about all of the treatments and all the side effects and all of the things that the treatments will do that we could possibly have to transition. We don't need to tell you about our treatments. You don't need to know what surgery we've had on our private parts. You don't need to know what effects hormones have had on our private parts. You don't need to know that. Like, you don't go up to like a random pubescent child and say like, oh my gosh, are your pubes growing? Like, you don't do that. Like, I don't know, like, you just don't do that, do you? Why do you feel the need to do that to trans people? It's just annoying. And we don't need to like explain the psychology of being trans, like, or like give you all these historical trans people, or like explain why it's not just a trend. And especially with non-binary people, they're just like, they don't have to explain to you why non-binary identities exist. Like, just accept what they're saying. Like, it doesn't really affect you that much. Like, it's literally, if you're doing the bare minimum, respecting their name and pronouns, and if you're gonna be like a really decent, like a decent-ish, like bottom tier decent person, you'll kind of change the way you think about them and not think of them as a man or a woman, but as a non-binary person. Like, it doesn't affect you. Like, I don't get why you care so much. We don't need to explain to you the nuance of biological sex, because guess what? There is deep nuance in biological sex that you don't learn in year 5, unfortunately, Jeremy. Like, it's just not something that you learn because it's kind of complicated, and that's why we don't know about it that much. Shocking, I know. We didn't all go to med school. And it's just, like, the thing that annoys me so much is when people are like, yeah, well, your brain isn't fully developed until you're 25. Some random ass, like, people from my school have said that to people to tell them that they're not trans. And I'm like, you're like 12. You're 12. Like, that they were when this happened. And I was like, you make yourself look so fucking dumb. Like, honestly, just, if you're gonna do it for anyone, do it for yourself, because you look like a dumbass. You don't need to know where we use the bathroom. You don't need to ask non-binary people what bathroom they use, because like, it just doesn't matter. Like, they can shit where they want. And You don't need to like know if we're out to certain people. We don't need to explain our coming outs to you. You don't have to know if we do certain bodily functions. You don't need to ask someone if they're menstruating or if they come in a certain way. You don't need to ask them that. Like, yeah. It's just annoying because like half of the things that like all these people, when they're like all these transphobes, because they're just being transphobic, they just don't want to accept the people different to them. And like, wow, it must be so hard for you. Totally not hard for me. Totally easy for me. Yeah, that's the rant over. Now I'm going to talk about some other things. So I said that you don't need to be a scientist to like be trans and be able to explain like all the scientific parts of being trans, but I do want to make a video on biological sex because it's a super interesting topic and not many people understand quite what it is. Like, they don't quite understand it as it actually is, if that makes sense. Like, there's a lot more intersex people than you expect. There are about as many intersex people as there are people that have red hair. See, why do I memorize these facts? Just to be able to like say to people, like justify the fact that like trans people and non-binary people exist. Like, wow, it kind of sucks. So I just wanted to say, like, please take this into consideration when you're discussing trans people, when you're talking to trans people, because we go through a lot without having to explain all of this to you. Like, this might be new for you, but this is our whole life. Like, we have been going through this since the day we was born. We've been dealing with this stuff for a very long time. And we probably do know a lot about it, but maybe we don't want to explain it to you. And there's so many things that, like, we're going through, like dysphoria, transphobia, hearing about hate crimes on the news, fear of being hate crimed, the mental illnesses, which a ridiculously large amount of us suffer with, and constantly being demonized in the media, and just, like, the work that we have to do to get legally and medically recognized. Like, it's just, you know, it's just. So just please, like, be considerate and find out what you can through reliable internet sources. Like, put in some time and effort to make sure that your sources are proper. Don't just, like, go on Reddit, please, for God's sake. And just, like, support the trans people in your life, and don't always have to make hanging out with them and accepting them have to have like this backdrop of medical and social justice. Like, we don't exist to be like this inspiration to you, or like to be like your sob story. Like, we don't need to be a sob story. The only reason that we're a sob story is because society makes it to be a sob story to be trans. Like, my life would be fine if like gender roles weren't so forced upon me and I wasn't ashamed for feeling certain ways. Okay, I'm gonna sign off here. That is the rant completed. And I hope you look forward to my video on biological sex, because I'm planning on coming up with a very good title for it. So